Welcome to episode 50 of the Filmumentaries podcast. 50, so just over 2 years, and the podcast has hit middle age. And you know what? It feels pretty good. So thanks for your support over the last 24 months. I really do appreciate it, especially those that have been able to support the podcast via Patreon. There are now 103 patrons donating via Patreon to help pay for the podcast. If you enjoy my work, and it is just me and my laptop and my mic, if you are able to support me, please visit patreon.com/Jamie Benning. That's JamieBenning. Do check out the tiers on Patreon. You can pay like $1 a month, $12 a year, or about £10 UK or your country's equivalent to help support the podcast for an entire year. There's another tier at £2.50 per month or equivalent. That will entitle you to watch any video versions of the podcast that I release, which I do occasionally. It depends on getting the permission of the guest, of course. You'll also be included on the credits of any video projects that I do under the Filmumentaries banner. The next one up gets you a free poster print. And then there's the top one, the all-time hero tier, for which you'll receive a bunch of Filmumentaries merch over time. I think after 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, etc. Okay, so if you heard episode 49, you'll know that it was the first part of a two-parter with ILM's chief model maker, Lorne Peterson. Today, you'll be hearing the second and final part of that conversation with him. We talk about a number of subjects. There's still a lot of Star Wars, there's a bit of Pirates of the Caribbean, there's even some Wild Wild West. And bearing in mind that the Will Smith Oscars incident had just happened, I think we both did very well not even to bring it up. In fact, I don't know why I've brought it up now. So here's my conversation with Lorne Peterson, ex-ILM model maker, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on.
You know, when we first started out Empire, we had no idea that we would fill rooms with models, you know, which we did. It just and the size of the model shop kept growing to fit that. The size of the whole company kept growing, and we had to keep buying out sections. We only got half of the warehouse to begin with, so then this company called Easy Strip that stripped furniture had a bay. And we offered them so much money. We found them another warehouse and offered them, I think, $10,000 to move. And they went, hey, great. Well, the next one wanted $20,000.
Of course, yeah.
On and on and on. So until we bought out there was probably 4 or 5, 6 companies to buy out and have them move so we could have the whole warehouse. Mm. We had to build a second story also.
Really? Yeah. It was growing that fast.
Without a permit.
Right. just doing it just out of pure need. Yeah.
It's just we'll apologize later.
Yeah.
Ask for forgiveness later, you know.
That's it. Yeah. So would you have to be kind of on hand when the guys were shooting with the motion control systems in case, you know, something needed repairing, or, you know, because I can imagine a situation where some of these motion control systems weren't particularly reliable, and maybe they'd move in ways that weren't intended, and, you know, something might snap off. Or
there's certainly some shots where you have to send 1 or 2 people as a tender, you know, to the model, especially by the time you get to Pirates of the Caribbean. It took miniature sailors to pull all the lines and change the sails and reef the sails. And, you know, you'd say, okay, I need an hour and a half. 2 people need an hour and a half to reef the sails and get the wind from coming from the other side. And, you know, you tie these little ropes and all that stuff. You really learn that stuff, sailor stuff pretty quick. But yes, some models there was these wonderful times sometimes when you'd sit in the dark with stage guys as the motion control camera went through its paces, and then your job was, as soon as it reaches this, you do this. Mm-hmm. And we'd have these long conversations in the dark, you know, with sitting on apple boxes. And sometimes I really valued those certain people. I'd tell them later on, it was so enjoyable to sit with you guys, you know, and just talk and have the time to do it, you know.
Yeah. So when did the flood kind of happen? I mean, was it post Star Wars? Was it post Empire where you started working on multiple movies at one time?
Yeah, I go back to that analogy with the golden egg that we got this word from George that some of his friends wanted to make films too with special effects. They were designing films. And so Matt Robinson and first Spielberg, with Raiders of the Lost Ark. But Raiders of the Lost Ark was a pretty simple film. It wasn't as complex as Empire for sure. And we did that. But then the rush came. This rush came of, oh my God, they're asking us to do E.T. and now Poltergeist and now Starman and that kind of thing. And this flood started happening. And the problem was they started building printers as fast as possible because that was always the bottleneck. And but we were still kind of in the same space. And you keep fitting more and more project into a smaller space, and you can't necessarily hire more people to immediately. You can't. In Northern California, you can't say, okay, we're putting on 6 more knowledgeable and talented crew members in the model shop. You had to hunt for them. And in reality, there was no godlike person off to the side who could say, George, there needs to be 100 more people in that company. They are working till 12 o'clock at night, that kind of a thing. And I kind of learned a lesson there with that. I think I did 2 films at the same time, Raiders and E.T., I think, of supervising. And that is a really bad idea. It's because Raiders had a budget of, what a low price Ferrari would be today. Mm-hmm. And E.T. had a bigger budget. Or was it the other? It was the other way around, I think. And I would say, well, I have to devote this person to that person. And the person with a bigger budget said, before I said, no, I want Bob. I'd made up the name, and I want him working on it. I don't want blank. Mm-hmm. I've dealt with him before. And you go like, oh God, I'm having to juggle. I can never make everybody is going to be unhappy here. Taking, borrowing from Peter to pay Paul kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. And it was a producer got her neck on the chopping block because of that. But on my part, I realized it wasn't my fault. It wasn't her fault, but I was more in a position of advantage. Mm-hmm. There's only at that time, I used to compare it to, I said, when they asked us up to do Empire, we got to be the cowboys with the pearl-handled guns and the white piping on black outfits, all that stuff. And by the time we got to Jurassic Park, we were jeans and shit on our boots. Yeah. In the model shop, because it's as if they couldn't fully understand, well, what is the magic? What's the magic between model, art department, and the stage and the motion control? It's this formula that other people don't seem to be able to get right all the time. It's hard for them to get it right, and so you have a little bit of magic attached to you as to what you can do. If you never say no, and you achieve the impossible, or I used to say it would be like. A magician or the guy who does the tricks for him. He says, okay, this time I want an elephant to disappear into the sky in a puff of smoke. And you say, yeah, we'll do that. And you come up with a way to do it.
Yeah, you're sort of, in a way, you can become victims of your own success, I guess, in a way, because, I've a much smaller scale thing when I've crewed jobs before and I've brought crews on to do a particular job. And that maybe one week you haven't quite got the crew you want because this guy needs to go there and that girl needs to go there. And suddenly, you lose that dynamic of having the best team just focusing on one job. Yeah. And also, I think what is clear from what you've described already and what I've read about working on those early movies is that there was no defined well, there were defined roles, but there was a little bit of space either side of them, you know. So
Hmm.
you were making models, but you could be involved in the motion control part of it, or you could be speaking to the designer or whatever, you know. Whereas I think modern day now, it seems, when I've spoken to people who work in effects now, it's I do this and he
Yeah.
does that and she does this, and it's very
You know, yeah,
compartmentalized.
especially with CG.
Yeah.
I never, it wasn't something I wanted to do. I didn't do any kind of transfer like that. Really, at Jurassic Park period of time, I thought, people like Dennis Muren was saying, well, maybe you have about 3 years left in your career.
Hmm.
And it didn't turn out that way. Oh, I wanted to backtrack a little bit when I
Yeah,
said
sure.
about designing the trick for a magician. There's an interesting thing that happened near the beginning that eventually it changes. Over time you get a little bit more distant from all the other parts. And when we were doing Poltergeist, Spielberg is there. He comes up, and we have a meeting with about 6 of the people from of the different departments, and I'd had the story. They gave us the storyboards a couple of days ahead of time, so you kind of look through and take a marking pen and say, "This is probably going to be us. It's probably us. We'll do this. We'll do that." And so Spielberg, what he does is he would go, okay, he'd turn one page and he'd say, "Okay, Dennis, this looks like blah 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 blah." And I said, "What do you have to say?" And so Dennis says, "Okay, what we're going to do, we're going to do that, and stuff." So when they came to the imploding house, Spielberg says, "Hey, Lorne, this is going to be a model, I'm sure. What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I thought about it, and I thought what we'll do is how a magician has a magic wand and he makes a bouquet come out of the magic wand. What we'll do is we'll take the bouquet and suck it back into the wand." He said, "Okay, on to the next," and it's like that's all the director wants. He doesn't want you to spend. It's all of a sudden it's your job. It's your job. And like one time when we started Empire, again jumping back, George Lucas wanted to come that day. They said, "Oh, George Lucas wants to come and look at the models." So I thought, okay, he's going to be here at 10. I have some questions I got to ask. I want to ask him. We haven't actually spent much time in the same place. And I thought, if I have 8 questions, I was like, oh God, let's narrow it down just a little bit, like 1 or 2, just to kind of get a feel for the direction. And so I started asking the question, and I get about halfway, 3/4 of the way through it, and he says, "That sounds like your job to me." And I was like, I never asked him a question like that ever again, about what he wants or any of that kind of stuff. It's like, he chose all these people because they do what he wants them to do. He knows already what they want him to do, it isn't his job. He doesn't have the time for it. He's making a movie. He's not micromanaging his company. That kind of the creative part of his company.
Yeah. So each time you were engaged on another movie, there is that expectation to kind of come up with something new, to reinvent the magic kind of thing. Are there particular movies in your huge catalogue of films that you worked on that feel like they were the milestones?
I put in front of myself, I printed out a list of all these. Well, certainly Temple of Doom was a milestone. It was quantum leaps beyond Raiders, more so than Star Wars to Empire, really. And I mentioned that bottleneck at Optical, and Spielberg got together, and he said what he wants. He went through the storyboards in the same kind of way, and after it was over with, Dennis and I were talking, and I just said, "Oh my God, this is just a lot of work, a lot of model work, very intensive model work." And he said, "The only way we're going to be able to do it, if everything has to go through Optical, it's not going to make it. They have all these other films happening too, and it'll be this bottleneck like no one's ever seen before." that we have to try to do it like every miniature shot is like a live action shot. It doesn't have things added to it. As an example is the tipping of the water tank. No, yes, it has a few little people running around at the bottom at the beginning, but everything else is just fully, a giant model. It's like, taking up a quarter of a tennis court kind of a thing. And we started doing bigger models. And we had to take them outside and do them in the parking lot. And there were towers up 30 feet for water tank. But at the time, believe it, I said, I had the presence of mind to say, if we can pull this off, the model shop will be real pivotal thing. And when it comes time to consider for Academy Awards, you might put my name in there too. He must have remembered that, or it was so obvious that we had done these shots that the water down the tunnel shot, and it was like all of these major shots. Have you ever seen? There's a Scrooge McDuck that came up recently. It's in a book of Carl Barks, of all of those shots, the water running down the tunnel, the natives, the dam, the Scrooge McDuck, and the boys, getting against the wall as the water comes rushing through, and it's one of those what Secrets of Cibola and that kind of thing, of Scrooge McDuck stories.
Right? No, I haven't seen that.
Borrowed them from. I'll send you one or two of those.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Try to remember.
Temple of Doom, I think, as well, because you're in a more earthly reality in that film, I guess, aren't you? So it's not a spaceship, it's not an out of this world model. You kind of have to buy the reality of it a bit more, and therefore it's, I guess, more challenging for you guys to achieve that. Yeah,
because it isn't. Your model won't be shot against a blue or a black screen, and everything added and all that stuff. And of course, now with CG, they could change the lighting, but the lighting has to be right. All the, the one that comes down the water tunnel, everything has to be tied down. All the little electrical system has to be waterproof for the little light bulbs. And you can't have boulders and rocks flying, but you can have oil drums flying at the camera, that kind of thing. And Dennis Murin came up with the idea that, well, one of the things that happens, you have water doesn't scale well at all. Fire and water doesn't scale well. So he comes up with an idea that, well, what we'll do is we'll have these giant air tanks, pressure tanks with big hoses, and they'll all face against the direction of the water. And it'll atomize all the droplets that come flying at you. And that's what it almost looks like. The water is trying to resist, coming forward. And it's that air pressure coming back at it that's blowing back all the little bubbles. And there was a Hollywood film called, I think, You're the Barbarian, YOR, and they didn't do the water air thing. They copied us with the water thing, and it looks like basketballs are heading towards the two actors, flying through the air. Basketballs of water. And, that was a brilliant thing.
Did you win the Oscar on Temple of Doom as well? Yes. So you won it for Star Wars, and then
no, I didn't. I didn't win it for Star Wars. It was Grant McCune was the head of the model shop for show, and I didn't realize till realize it that I guess in practice I always thought number 2, but one of the John Dykstra's wife wrote, says, yeah, it was Grant, and Lorne was the chief model maker, and I said, oh, I never knew that they thought of me that way, but I guess George Lucas did.
Yeah. Well, I guess you can take that one as a win, I'm sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, everybody has this, a major ego. I think, from my parents and everything, having a control over it is a good thing,
For sure. Yeah.
But not keeping a secret from yourself that, yes, everybody has tendencies to rush out in front of the crowd. But many, many times it's good to have the team rush out with the crowd with you.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
I skip between things, and that's I do not think chronologically sometimes. I mean, I can do that. Here I'm thinking, somebody, here I am older, and somebody in a situation like this asked me, he says, well, you hired, I said to him, I said, well, first I hired people my age, and then I hired people 10 years younger, and then I hired people 20 years younger, and et cetera, 30 years, that kind of thing. And people had fathers as old as I was, and that kind of. And so he says, God, are the people really respectful of you? You're 60 years old or 65 years old, and the other people. And I said, yeah, they are. They really are. I get to occupy a really a real role. And I said, but if it's a film is a little bit like, your team is rushing into battle. Everybody has a sword. You're rushing with the people, everybody else. And Lorne falls to one knee, but still retains hold of his sword. And Fawn will come along and hook his arm under my arm and get me back on my feet. If I fall to both knees and drop the sword, he picks up the sword, so he has two swords in one hand.
Yeah.
So it's a delicate. You need. It's a delicate position. You still need to perform.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
No rest. There's no resting on one's laurels completely.
Yeah, I was describing a very similar situation to my wife about my job earlier, where I'm now training people that were the age. They're at the age that I was when I first started out, so I'm 20 years older than them, and it's a challenge to keep yourself current, isn't it? I guess is the thing. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
How did that feel when Jurassic Park came along? Leaping ahead here to 91, 92, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I've heard those stories of Steve Williams just kind of going down that route of doing the CGI kind of in secret to show Spielberg and co when they arrived, and Dennis telling him, don't do it, you're wasting your time, and all of that. But for somebody like you whose job is purely hands-on, making these models and making these environments and these creatures, that must have been quite an alarming time. I mean, you said that Dennis had said you've maybe got 3 years left. What was your actual feeling at that time? Can you remember?
I'm not absolutely sure that thing is accurate about Dennis saying wasting time, because there's been a couple of times when the company said, we have. It wasn't said in so many terms, but go off, we'll blend it into the budget, and you do that little secret thing and see how develops, and it developed both times with John Knoll and also with Steve. That was the trick, that was, and they took it I guess this wouldn't be too bad to say it now that we had a contract with Silicon Graphics, and the system that they wanted to experiment with Apple, and so they did. Years later, they sent a group off, a small group off, like, okay, you guys develop this, and it was very successful, and it really saved the day, and something on Phantom Menace, I think. Yeah, Jurassic Park. It's like it was a real gulp moment to realize it wasn't going to be stop motion and all that kind of stuff. We did have a little bit of a role to play. The model shop wasn't really big in Jurassic Park, but we had other projects to work on. But it was the sign that something really big was happening. Jim, the head of the company, Jim Morris, called a meeting one time and said, things are really changing in this next 6 months and this year. Things are really going to change in our industry. And he calls a meeting about a month and a half later and says, forget that thing about 6 months and a year, things changing. They're happening right now. We have to prepare and be ready. And it's coming down the pike. And it was scary, to hear that thing. And then Nilo, bless his heart, remember, he gave me this book, like, what's the color of your parachute? Like, it's the end of the road for you guys. Here's a book that Lorne might help Lorne, and all it did was bring more of a gulp moment to my life, And, but things changed, and somebody had coined the phrase bigatures. All of a sudden, Model Shop was doing much bigger things, not not spaceships flying through air anymore. Well, but back a minute, on Phantom Menace, we made the spaceships, the vehicles, but then they digitized them, and then we painted them, and then they used a program called like Make Sticky to put that paint job onto the model. So we were still a part of it, but it very quickly, they weren't taking our models and doing motion control anymore. They could control them on the computer. So, that was a bit of a scary moment, but they wanted us to do big things, execution arenas and pod race arenas. And these were, models half as big as a tennis court and that kind of thing. And they did things. And originally Theed City, somebody had the idea, says, well, in the ancient days, early film days, they did these things called a Black Maria. They couldn't afford, electricity wasn't as easily available. So they'd just do a silk in the ceiling, and then they would rotate the whole set for the time of day. So they could do a shot at 11 o'clock that they could use 1 and 2 o'clock for the same light angle and that kind of thing. So we thought, well, we'll speed up shooting if we could make it rotational, that kind of a thing. It turned out it was a bit heavy for that, but it did for a little while. But yeah, Model Shop went on to, just the fact that we went from, say, 7 people to 30 to 35, 40 people to 50 people to 105 people. 105 people can make an awful lot more models in a year and a half than 7 people can. And by the time we were doing Jedi and things like that, the Model Shop was just humming. It was like you had to have multiple layers of people. One person could not supervise every single part. You had to divide things up a lot. But it was very exciting. It continued to be that, that magic trick thing, that. But even there were simple magic trick ones like the log roll for the Ewoks, on Jedi, and that was like a big set with miniature redwood trees and logs swinging and hitting I knew that if you crush plastic things, it just bounces back. There's a memory, so that isn't the look that shot took, going way back here now. But and I, believe it or not, at one time in industrial design had been asked to carve motorcycle helmets when they first came across the thing, and oh my God, in clay, trying to make an symmetrical, and the boss would come in and feel it and go like, it's a little bit higher on this side, maybe a 30-second. You'd work like 2 days, and so I knew the process of doing that, doing a fiberglass version of it, a mold and fiberglass version, and then nickel plating a nickel onto the outside of that to make a mold to be manufacturing. It was a process that eventually went through, and I went, ooh, I could we could make it in plastic. We could slightly coat it with a coating of nickel, and then acid remove the plastic, and we'd have these tin cans that would crush really well. And some of that is going back to the industrial model making, industrial thing. It's like I used to say that I knew processes, materials and processes that other people didn't know. I knew like walnut shells of different grades played a big role in all the different films, and microballoons, and those were making landslides, snow avalanches, and those plains of snow, microscopic snow for Empire, and even the nickel thing of the head. But no one comes up to you and pats you on the back and says, that was incredible with the nickel and it really crushed. They just know that if it didn't work, so you just keep going on to more, and it's like once people start to expect things of you, you do things unexpectedly that you never even imagined that you could come up with. Sometimes people ask, well, how did you just keep doing this and that? It's this energy that happens that once the steam is in the engine, and there's more steam, and it keeps pumping away, and you keep coming up with new things, because you're everybody's giving you so many brownie points for, like, whoa, that was a great shot, great shot.
What did Stephen think of the house in Poltergeist in the end, by the way? What did Stephen think of it?
We had a hard time achieving exactly what it was. Is we built it like a kite. And I thought, well, how about, eventually I thought, well, balsa snaps with a lot of energy. We couldn't have that. So I said, well, how about we soak it overnight in bleach, and then they snap like pasta. So that was one thing, but it still was really strong. When we tried to pull all that back in, it didn't happen. So the various guys, Ease was one of the guys I hired. Ease Al Young was an architect, and I wanted to be an architect when I first got out of high school, and I said, yeah, we need, I needed a team that had this whole variety of different skills. And so Ease was in charge of that. And eventually they had to do a lot of cuts on the balsa wood, and then putting little steel wires about the size of your hair, pulling down and going to bigger wires, and eventually to 1/8 inch cable and 3/16 cable. But and then a big vacuum. Somebody came up with the idea of like having these giant vacuum tanks and sucking that down in. It had a problem in that the exposure was a little bit dark on that shot, and they'd asked me how much it would cost to do it again, and I said, I'm afraid it'll almost, there's nothing that I could retrieve from what we had already done, and it'll cost about as much as the first one did. And it was like, well, at that time you could buy a suburban home for that much money, and so it was like, no, we'll make that shot work. It's a little too dark, but it was a wow moment, and that's what they want in a movie, and that's considered a real success when the audience goes, It's like the crash in Men in Black, that when they're standing there with the big guns and everything, and that plane comes in, and that dirt, which wasn't dirt, it had to be from vermiculite, fuller's earth, dried peat moss that I ran over with trucks over and over again to break up the particles of the, I ordered something like 2 giant truckloads of peat moss to be laid out into the parking lot to dry out in the sun, and then drive cars over it to break it up. And so to be the right formula for the dirt that, would have that dramatic moment, that almost like a tsunami of dirt coming towards the camera. And the audience just went wild at that moment. That was a pivotal moment for Men in Black. The same thing with, it's just a pity we didn't have more cameras set up and more ability to do it again. It's like a bit water under the bridge, and I'm mentioning it now. I never would mention it like a year or 2 or 3 years, 4 years after the film was made, that kind of thing.
But you were really scientists as much as you were artists, and you were inventors as well. I mean, some people go through their lives without one good idea. You've had hundreds by the sense.
Yeah, one time I spoke at a university back east, and a guy came up to me, an older guy, and he said, I'm an engineer, mechanical engineer. And he said, you guys are engineers. And I said, yeah, I guess, designers. And he said, yeah, it's just like takes a lot of knowledge of physics and mathematics. And it's true that it's like when I go around the world, I see things that are a problem or could be fixed, for want of a screwdriver. I've been to people's houses that say, do you have a Phillips head screwdriver? Yeah, I think my husband has one here. Well, just a second, there's a bit of a problem here, and, but more than that, it's like, it's almost not everybody's problem do they want to be solved. And sometimes you overshare, oversolve, that this and this and this and this and this could be happen, and they're perfectly happy to not have that happen. I've noticed that in myself, because I did it for 40 some years, and of that kind of thing, designing and building and constructing and knowing how the mechanics and the physics of everything works. And something happened the last night, and I said something like, her husband is talking about sailing, and he says he almost missed not Molokai, but Maui by 23 miles. And I said, well, 17 miles you drop, unless it's up above, high above the horizon, you can't see over the curve. And his wife says, how in the world do you know that? 17 miles. I said, well, to avoid the draft, I took every class in college that I could, every geology class, every physics class, every, that kind of stuff, I guess. And then doing it for year after year after year, you absorb those kind of things, because we had people that were, had engineering degrees in chemistry and physics, optics. Within ILM, the resources were incredible. One time, I asked for a whole bunch of stuff on Empire Strikes Back from our library. We have an incredible research library, and I get all of this paperwork, and some of it's written in what I know either Urdu or Hindi. I didn't know which. And I thought, well, I don't know, get on the intercom. And I said, is there anybody in the building that knows how to read Urdu or Hindi? And this woman in electronics calls back, I lived in India for 9 years, so I can speak and read both Hindi and Urdu. I'll be right over. And you got used to those kind of things about chemistry, or if you had questions about that kind of stuff, you knew that there was somebody in the building that had a PhD in something, But not always. Some people just knew it from
experience.
Yeah.
When you were making those bigatures, as you said, on the Phantom Menace, I find it really interesting that movie still has a lot of model work in it, although the perception of it is that it's all CGI.
Which film are you talking about?
Phantom Menace.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The perception is it's all CGI. People kind of dismiss it. I don't like those later movies because they're all CGI. But in fact, there's a hell of a lot of model work, isn't there?
Not at all. It just has loads of stuff in it. Everything from Feed City to not the execution arena, but the pod race arena, the inside of the when you're inside the bay in which they're doing the maintenance on all the pod racers. We did that set. We set up the models. Well, Spielberg was setting up a shot to do it live action too. I'm not sure if it was miscommunication or what, and he liked ours better. Our awnings were better and draped better, and our the set of it, and the walnut shells on the floor, the ground walnut shells, and the color of the sand, matching the color of the sand. He liked our shot, and so he just put in Liam Neeson and talking. And that happened a couple of times, in which, particularly on AI, Spielberg liked our miniature better than the live action shot. Which puffs up one's chest a little bit.
And it takes a visionary director to sort of understand the benefits of doing something in miniature as opposed to creating it in a computer, and using each of those different artistic skills, whether it's VFX in a computer or whether it's you guys making the models, to understand what is the best thing to do for that particular shot. That's important, isn't it?
It's fallen by the wayside considerably. Directors aren't as knowledgeable, haven't had the experience of working in models at all, and very rarely does it actually happen with a practical model.
I had a couple of questions that some of my Twitter followers wanted to ask you. I always open up the option to do that because I've got all my questions and all my things I want to talk about, but I'm also aware that other people would love to talk to you as well. Some of them get so specific, Lorne. I don't know how specific you want to get.
Like any question.
One of the questions was from a guy called Peter Briggs, who is a screenwriter. He says that on the Millennium Falcon there was the plan to make it this kind of sunfish,
Yeah.
where it goes vertical after takeoff. And were there ever any mechanics made to try and have that cockpit rotate, or was that dismissed early on?
Well, the cockpit off the Millennium Falcon that everybody knows has the cockpit that was originally on the Rebel blockade runner.
Mm.
And it actually was capable of rotating. It didn't have a mechanics to have it rotated. My guess is that someone was going to do it stop motion.
Right.
They were going to step in there and rotate it like that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, that sunfish story, I've certainly heard the sunfish story, but I'm not sure that Joe has repeated it. It'd be interesting because I remember it from way back when. And the part of the thing is that George, I knew that he thought of it landing like that and then taking off and going like that, or rotating. I do a hand motion and you can't see where my hand goes to, but it went by the wayside really quick. Instantaneously it went. It was considered when we were building it, and then I don't think it's ever mentioned after that.
Fair enough. It gets slightly more specific from Peter as well. He talks about on that original long model, like the original Falcon with the cockpit up the front. Yeah.
It became the Princess ship.
Yeah. In that original model, there are like little escape pods in like circular pits. And he wants to know, are the circular pits on the front of what we now know as the Millennium Falcon, were they planned to be the escape pods? He said, I realized this is 50 years ago, 40 plus years ago.
Yeah. Well, no. Joe changed the scale of those escape pods too. Originally, they were bigger, and since the Princess ship was supposed to be bigger, we changed down to made those pods smaller. I'm on the Millennium Falcon. I'm not sure because the escape pods came. It was the Princess's ship where they were supposed to escaping from. They never escaped in pods from the Millennium Falcon. So
I'm not thrown out, I would think.
He was talking about, but there would be no logical reason to have escape pods on the Millennium Falcon because it wasn't a part of the script.
Yep, I agree. There was another guy, Paul Weller, who follows me, who said, ask Lorne if he really did strap a rocket motor to a Y-wing model whilst working on Star Wars and shoot it across the parking lot at ILM. I don't know where that's come from.
Yes, but Grant McEwen, the head of the model shop on the first show, was really into amateur rocketry. And he certainly took it to another level. And we would go to a park nearby because the airport was right next door to ILM. And so there was a park nearby that he would take and shoot rockets. We'd go down there at lunchtime, and oh yeah, here we go, shoot them into the air again. So we put together pieces that we weren't using of the model shop. And one time, it turns out that a small airplane, which somebody didn't observe, was landing at the same time. It was on the path of landing path, and he shot it off, and and everybody went, "Oh my God!" It went in front of the airplane. Let's get out of here. Let's get our cars out of here. No one to take a photograph of, and got back to work. And then we heard that there was a little bit of a kerfuffle at the airport. Like, what in the world is happening? The pilot reports some kind of a rocket goes flying off in front of him. Something like that, But yes, Grant McEwen was big on rocket things and
it did happen.
And blowing up things and that kind of thing.
I was going to ask you about that actually. How was it sort of seeing your wonderful model work kind of blown to pieces for the movies? Is there a sense of satisfaction that your model is doing the big shot, or is there a kind of like, oh my God, all that hard work is gone?
It was always fun. And the ones that blew up we had a special way of blowing up, making it lighter. John and I investigated a lot of how to make plastics weaker than what chemicals to add to plastics that we would make molds and duplicates the X-Wings and TIE fighters and things like that. Of course, we never blew up the Millennium Falcon and never blew up the big white destroyer. When an explosion, Ken Ralston came up with a really clever idea with the top of the White Star Destroyer. He held up a like equivalent of a big bounce card and did a separate pass of a projection from a projector of an explosion and a fire. And that's how he got that fire. We didn't actually blow up the big Millennium Falcon. It would be too costly. It'd be blowing up your Ferrari. James Bond does not ruin a DB8 and they duplicate them in fiberglass and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
So it's the same kind of thing. You don't care about blowing up the fiberglass one. It was a little bit different by the time we got to Pirates of the Caribbean, because we had to blow up some incredibly beautiful model ships. You couldn't make molds of a 12 and 15 foot beautiful boat. The Excelsior. There's a very brief, funny story here about Excelsior and British and American. So we're building the Excelsior, and someone goes in and gold plates the thing on the back, and we're ready to shoot one day, and or the next day. It was like really close, and somebody says, don't the British spell Excelsior different than we do? And someone goes, oh my God, we left off the U. And so we quickly, redid the gold leaf of the Excelsior. But can you imagine if we went and shot like a week's worth of film with the wrong Excelsior on the back?
You would have been in big trouble.
We would have been in big trouble. It was like, that's the thing that you guys pay attention to,
I was also going to ask you, and I'll pop this bit back in when we were talking about Star Wars initially. That redesign of the Millennium Falcon happened quite quickly, I believe. Joe, I think I saw him interviewed about, he was talking about he went home that night and he made like 8 or 10 sketches and showed them to George. Do you remember the pressure of having to turn that model around quickly?
Well, I arrived just when the decision that wasn't going to be the Millennium Falcon. So they were already in the process of changing it over, putting a new cockpit, changing the scale of the front end of it, changing the pods. It was in the process. And I think when I did the pencil trick with the super glue, that's what they were doing at the time. And Bill Short and Dick Alexander were in the machine shop turning the big wooden core of the and making the steel framework on the inside, which then we got plastic domes and put over the top of that. But I was there right at that particular moment. So we were doing it fast, but the equipment wasn't ready to shoot it yet. George Lucas was off in England and was hoping and hoping and hoping that he would have more shots when he got back. And since no one had ever built equipment like that, motion control equipment and everything, it's hard to you can't. A director wants what he wants, and to keep explaining to him that there's technical difficulties. The producer hears that, and Kurtz was a very he knew physics and mechanics and what it was taking, all the logistics, and he had a bit of understanding, but still the director wants what he wants. He wants it. So there was a bit of tension, to say the least, during that period of time of what was being delivered. And the model shop jumped in there, and we did that large gun on this Death Star surface, and we did the pod dropping with C-3PO and R2-D2 from a forklift onto a net, black velvet. And then I added mica dust. You can get mica dust in all different sizes, and that's one of the things I was used to working with. And so, but the solenoids that pull back real quickly, I put a little wad of mica dust, and so that's the little sparkle that happens when the thing drops. But that shot was, everything was in camera, and that shot, there was nothing added.
Hmm.
So those were done as cherries, hoping that he wouldn't notice there wasn't a sundae underneath. Yeah.
So canny to come up with that idea of the dust, though, because that really makes you buy that
Yeah.
shot, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's mica dust is sparkly.
Yeah.
And not like mylar. You get this really bright thing. You get a more realistic, broken up little dust things.
Mm.
And some of those things happen. Some people think, well, we just built models. We just built these incredible models. Other times, there are times when like they need a little magic dust for Tinkerbell, for I think it was Hook. And so a couple of us came with the idea, we'll stretch black velvet. I'll go buy a pellet gun. We'll take the pearlescent powder that we use for various things. I'll stuff a little wad of pearlescent powder down the gun. We'll have the light oblique at the side, the camera set up over there, and then I'll shoot the pellet gun from the back side of the velvet, and it'll, in the darkness, all of a sudden there'll be a poof like that, and that's added to Tinkerbell. Another time for the day after tomorrow, the DP, Eric says, I need a bunch of snowdrifts. Optical, yes, they can do that, but they're really busy. And that would happen many times. And he'd say, we're really busy. What can we do to get snowdrifts? And I said, okay. Well, in the morning, tomorrow. And I set up a bunch of cardboard boxes, put a bunch of black velvet over it, and then just held really fine baking soda in my hand and said, okay, I want a big puff from the left going to the right. And I go like that. Okay, got that one. And then in less than a day, we had like this incredible library of snow blowing across that would be added to the actors, to scenes of New York, all that kind of stuff. So that's like short order cook model making. It happens in a really quick period of time. I used to tell the model maker sometimes things will happen when you have to think within a 90-foot radius, the answer to the problem that they have put up has to be here within 90-foot radius. It has to be in our warehouse. It has to be out in our attic. It has to be out in the field back behind us. Somewhere you have to find. You don't have time to order it. You don't have time to get in the car. It has to be here. And it's an interesting way, a good way of thinking about it. Sometimes your solution really has to be within the radius of where you are.
Yeah. And one thing that always strikes me about, the transition that's happened to computer visual effects is you don't have the space for happy accidents anymore. Because I'm sure there would be happy accidents in model making and in optical, if you're shooting a physical model for an optical, that, something is achieved that you didn't quite expect, but actually, oh, wow, that does fit what we want to achieve.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. When CG came along, let's say, which film was it? It was probably Attack of the Clones, with those long hallways, with big, long, skinny people. And I don't remember the names of everybody in the film.
I don't.
Like the fiends sometimes out there. But anyway, the Brian Gernan was making these long hallways that curved around. And I said, Brian, just put little weird odd things, little junk in the hallway, and something, just because CG can make those hallways day in and day out. They can just push the hallway button, the continuous hallway, as if they could push the continuous hallway. They don't do that. But I said, yeah, it has to be, throw in some regularities. Otherwise, we're completing on the wrong racetrack.
The final question I had from a follower was from somebody called The Space Shipper. They tweet pictures of spaceships day in, day out, which is nice, from all different movies and all different things. He asks, and I'm assuming it's a he, with hindsight, what project did he retain the most satisfaction from, and what are you most proud of? Difficult to slice and dice like that, I would imagine, but is there something that stands out?
Well, I've been asked that question before, and I would be derelict if I didn't use the same answer.
Yeah.
The Millennium Falcon is absolutely just proudest of, everybody loved the Millennium Falcon. But there's other times when, like there was a film Wild Wild West, and it's not everybody's favorite film at all. And it wasn't the chemistry wasn't great or that kind of thing. But I was working on one of the Star Wars films, and they came to me, the art director, producer came to me and said, would you split off and do the collapse into Monument Valley? There's a scene there. And I was known for, I had a set of machetes, special machetes that I had hard sharpened to the right, sharpened to the left, sharpened to the middle, like razor blade sharp, and you could carve. I had sets of them for the training the people that were the sculptors on things like Mustafar, the huge set that you can't sculpt big things without big tools. You can't do it with knives. You have to do it with machetes to start with. And so I had done some things like that. And they said, would you come over to Wild Wild West and split off and do that? And this was end of summer like that, very end of summer. And so we had to carve Monument Valley. But the trick is how to make it collapse, and I knew that from old Western movies, you make foam rocks and you hit a cowboy over the head with a foam rock and it bounces and it just doesn't look real. Big rocks do not look bouncy. A big rock collapses in Yosemite and it just impels itself into the ground with an incredible amount of force and creates this huge wind. So I thought, oh, there's a problem. And it was I thought the beanbags. Beanbags basically get thrown by kids. And me and my neighbors sometimes have lunches, big picnic lunches out there on the street and do beanbag tosses and things like that. And so I thought, do something like that. And then I thought, well, we have all these Nalgene jars in all different sizes. They're like scientific jars. And if I put motor oil of a certain weight in there and then lead shot, that if there's small rocks, I put small jars with a small amount of lead shot. And if I have big rocks, so I originally carved the Monument Valley things. And then I asked a crew of people to split it up like a mosaic, split it up into logical rocks for me, and then put code numbers on the backside hidden in a little hole with a Dymo marker so everybody knows this is layer 1, position 6, et cetera, et cetera. So they eventually knew it so well they didn't even have to look at the code number to how to put it together, because we do tests of the collapse. But anyway, so all the rocks would fall into the walnut sand that had matched the color of Monument Valley. We had a different way of matching the sand with a cement mix roller and a little bit of powder. And so then what I did was I said, well, somebody has to make me a big, giant gun operated so I can take walnut shells that have been mixed with alcohol, fairly dry, and yet run it through like a caulking gun, a giant caulking gun, and I'm sure you call them that. It's like a squeeze, comes out. And so then I need to, as we use ropes, straps to hold the thing together. I need to have the crew go in and shoot walnut shells with alcohol. And then that forms, as the alcohol evaporates, it makes it like you take a little bit of sand and you take spittle and you put it together like that, and it'll actually make a little hard thing, and you hit it with your fingers and it crushes, that kind of a thing. Whatever it is about your spit or a little bit of the alcohol and the dust around the walnut shells, and it's the same color as Monument Valley. And so when we have a piston that falls down the middle that is a wedge, it'll slightly push that away and crack all that delicate spaces in between that are filled with walnut shells and alcohol, which is now dried out. But we only have a certain amount. You let it dry too much and it falls apart again. It has to have a little bit of alcohol left in it, tiny bit of moisture. So once you put in the caulking, you only have a limited period of time to do the shot. Well, it took uh, it just took to try to get that shot, because they knew when they wanted to shoot it, and it was going to be shot outside, and they'd left it to the end, and the fall is coming, and rain starts in Marin County at the end of October, almost like clockwork. The first sprinkles, and then the rain starts. It started to change with global warming, but so anyway, what happened is I was just worked to me and the crew just trying to do that shot very fast, get everything done, doing all the tests, doing all the lead shot, all that kind of stuff. We worked, the crew that I had of about 5 people worked incredible hours. And my eyes were starting to, how these big bags I could tell by still photographs that were taken of me how the end of a film was at the beginning. And so we shot it, and the model shot's obligation, our mandate, is usually to do a shot 3 times, to reset it and do it so they could do it 3 times. Well, I was so tired when I saw that shot. I just thought, that's it. That's the explosion went off, the fall, everything, the wind, everything was perfect. The air was still. I'd set up a fishing pole with a long line with a piece of down on the end of it. And I had it off to the side, and I was watching. And at about 11 o'clock, I yelled to the crew, says, the down is not moving. There's no wind. You shoot right now. And so everybody jumps to I said it to the guy who was the stage manager, and he's the one that yells to everybody that you're supposed to do it. And so we did it. And I did something you'd never, ever do. I just turned around and walked towards the parking lot and went home to go sleep. And I just thought, if that's not it, that's impossible. It can't be. And I arrived in morning for the dailies at 8. And sure enough, it was like, everybody was just like, perfect. No, don't do 2 shots and everything. But it was a really big gamble. And I did tell the crew to stay and set up for another possible shot. But what happened is it started raining. And once it started raining, the sky was not, because they were trying to match footage from Monument Valley, so it had to be a certain time of the day and all the rest of that stuff, and they're doing as best we could. We could have waited a month or a week or anything. You couldn't wait till next spring or all that stuff. It had to be done. There's a number of things like that with Wild Wild West too. They burnt down the town by accident. They did too big an explosion, and they didn't test the water pressure on the live action thing. And they had a lot of water pressure at first, and then the water pressure dropped in the hoses. And so they burnt the thing down, and they asked the model shop to build it 1/3 scale and take it out to the desert just north of Mexico, where the sun was, it could be approximately at the right angle to match up the live action footage. And so we had to very quickly make this burnable, multiple layers of Western town. So Wild Wild West was an incredible accomplishment, and did the purpose. The trick worked, 1 take. So for me, it was like, it's not a great film, but it was a real feather in the cap to bring that off when I was asked to split off from one of the Star Wars films for a little bit to do that. So no one will remember that part, but it was one of those things that was a real watershed moment for what we had done, and the speed that we'd done it, and the miraculousness of how it all worked out. If the horseshoe hadn't been there, that kind of a thing, horseshoe nail hadn't been there, if the rocks bounced, everybody would have groaned a little bit. They're kind of like, well, that's the best we do. But afterwards, no one said, hey, those rocks didn't bounce, except the crew of the 5-6 people that I worked with, And
I'm gonna go and check it out. I've not seen that film in a while, actually.
Yeah.
Maybe I won't see the whole film. Maybe I'll just find that bit.
just find that.
Yeah, I'll definitely go back and watch that again. Hey, I've got something here that a friend of mine sent me today in overnight post to get here. He's an artist, and he made this, and he wants me to. This is for you. This is for you, and it says, the guy's saying, "What the fuck is my job?"
Yeah.
So he's called Tokyo Sex Whale.
Uh,
his name as an artist, and he's
well,
sent
wait
me.
until he sees that. If he looks up on YouTube that little, Star Wars 22
Yeah, I'll send that to him for sure.
Yavin.
He sent me this as well, and
Oh, nice,
little one
nice,
of
nice.
the Death Star. So
Wow,
I'll send those
nice.
on to you. So I'll get your details at some point. Yeah, that'd be great. So thanks so much for that. That was fantastic. I feel like we could continue talking for another 2 hours quite easily. But
We could. Well, any kind of a follow up thing you want, let me
great.
know.
Yeah, nice.
But to plow through some more of the things you've done. It's like it's a bit of a commitment to sit down for a while to listen to these, but they're great.
Oh,
They're
good.
really
I found out the other day that my biggest listenership is California by far. I think there's just a lot of people in the industry I hear that are listening to my podcast, which I think is great because, like I said to Craig, I think Craig Barron said to me, we're not particularly good at recording our history
oh
in
yeah,
the film industry, and Craig has got some stuff at the Academy
yeah.
Museum I saw recently, along with Ben Burt, who they're both good friends. And he thanked me for doing the interview,
Yeah.
which is really nice.
Well, thank you very much, Jamie.
Thanks,
It's
Lorne.
been
I
an
appreciate it.
absolute pleasure.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my chat with Lorne Peterson there. Such a nice guy. Really did enjoy our conversation, and I genuinely could have spoken to him for hours more. Unfortunately, I had another engagement that I had to get to. Next up is another ILM employee, but also ex-Matt World and ex-Weta. Now retired, this matte painter and art director is based in Australia, and I spoke to him at his home via Zoom. And if, like me, you pored over the behind-the-scenes Star Wars and Indiana Jones material as a kid, you'll recognise his name immediately. Michael Pangrazio. Michael and I talked just a couple of days ago at some length. He's also kindly offered to put me in touch with some of his old colleagues who he thinks will make great guests for future episodes. So you can expect that conversation with Michael in the next couple of weeks. That's May 2022. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so again for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.